We're going to do 5 minutes of you trying to get to know this character, and then we will do formulation on 5 minutes for fun.
Well, is this Sarah Jessica Parker's character by chance?
Yes,
okay, I know nothing about Sex and the City. I'm just
That's good. That's good.
How to be patient.
Preston, how are you feeling today?
I'm good. I'm just a mere passenger in this one. I'm post-call. I'm a little bit sluggish, but Margaret promised that she would be the captain of the ship today.
I am the captain today. And today we are doing our first ever episode on psychodynamic, psychoanalytic approaches to therapy, which listeners, Preston did ask if we could do this earlier in season 1, and I flat out just go, no, I need more time.
She was like, it's too broad. We don't know enough.
There's so much. I mean, I'm going to limit myself to only being able to have 3 caveats. Like, I can only take something back and say sort of 3 times this episode. And
okay, I'll be counting
above
those.
3, yeah. If I go above 3, like, editor, we need like a buzzer, like some sound in there. But so today we are going to do not a historical overview, but an overview of some of the core concepts that I was first taught when I started out in psychodynamic, and then also core concepts I've learned over the last few years doing a psychoanalytic fellowship. So I will say I'm not in candidacy. I'm not fully trained. This doesn't count. This is me giving my credentials. This is not a caveat.
Yeah.
But I just finished it a couple of weeks ago, my first year of training in psychoanalytic thinking at one of the Psychoanalytic institutes. So we will be talking about kind of core concepts and then myths, misconceptions, and then at the halfway point, I have made up a case that I'm going to have Preston interview me as a patient, as a fictional character, who he does not know who that fictional character is. And then we're going to, in real time, try and formulate together. And I will give you some guidance on thinking about formulating from a dynamic perspective.
I'm ready to formulate.
You're ready.
This engine's primed.
You're ready.
Formula 1.
What's that? Ravioli. So, however, we will still do an icebreaker, which is not in form with how psychoanalytic sessions are run. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to first start by asking you, what are some like ideas, beliefs, kind of misconceptions that you yourself, or we both of us have held about psychoanalysis or psychodynamic therapy? Because I have a lot of my own that I held.
Well, it's time. So I don't think I'm afraid of the scrutiny of psychoanalytic peers the way you are, because I'm not in training at a psychoanalytic institute. So there's no row of corduroy that's raising an eyebrow at me when I say these things. So I think it's the concept of it is cool. Like what's it called? A chase lounge, laying back, imagining you reliving your childhood while someone kind of guides you along. I've just been having trouble seeing it through a scientific lens, which is how I like to conceptualize a lot of things. So I remember there's this Wikipedia page I love. It's called like essentially the anthology of pseudoscience. And like right there is psychodynamic psychoanalytic therapy as you are scrolling through, and it lives right next to, like astrology and phrenology and everything else, because it's this method of interpreting things that's really just conjecture built upon conjecture, built upon conjecture, built upon conjecture. And I think that while it can be a fun exercise, sometimes people just kind of chin-stroke themselves into a maelstrom and it turns into nothing. So
you're cooking. This is gonna be an episode.
Yeah. So it's like,
no,
I think it's cool, and I appreciate the optics of it, but then also I'm like, this gets a little bit too fuzzy, way too fast, and that like the only real benefit of therapy is the relationship between the therapist and the patient. So however you achieve that relationship is I think the most important thing. So those are all kind of like the things I have against psychodynamic therapy. On the other half, I think it's really cool. Like I think it's fun to think about it. I like when people talk about their psychodynamic formulations. I think it sounds intelligent. It's poetic, graceful, even the way they describe the human mind, and I kind of aspire to be like that too. So I'm like a hater, but maybe it's just because I'm outside of the club.
See, that's insight into some of it. But so critique wise, I think certainly the history kind of you're saying of what is the evidence basis for this. Can you prove or disprove it? Like, does it feel kind of just like it's made up out of nowhere? And in some ways, it does feel like that, even to me sometimes. Not all the time, but and then the kind of other side of you saying there's something about the narrative element of it that seems like it has maybe a lot of depth or like a broader view of people than maybe other ways of formulating a psychiatric patient's experience might be.
Yeah, like it's like you can get stuck on the rules of is it falsifiable or not, but then you don't want to put yourself in this box. You want to think abstractly and appreciate that there are really cool tools that come out of this way of thinking. Not to derail the conversation, but have you ever heard of Russell's teapot? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't.
Okay. So the idea with like a lot of these like scientific theories is that something is like falsifiable, meaning that like you can formulate a null hypothesis and then by disproving that you move a little bit closer to the truth.
Right.
So
it's not circular.
Yeah, the null hypothesis is like aliens don't exist, right? And then you discover evidence of extraterrestrial life on Mars. Now we're a little bit closer to aliens existing. So that would be a falsifiable hypothesis where one piece of evidence can shatter the whole thing, you know? But Russell's teapot is basically the conjecture that there's a teapot that exists somewhere on the other side of Mercury. And you could never prove that it's not there. But my hypothesis is that it exists. And so that's like a not falsifiable hypothesis. But it doesn't mean like there could be a teapot on the other side of Mercury. We don't know or not. So while something is not falsifiable, it doesn't kind of fall through the channels of scientific scrutiny or it's not compatible with the scientific method, but it still remains agnostic to us as to whether or not it's true. So I don't know. I think about Russell's teapot with psychodynamic theory.
We're going to be really in our foils this episode. I can feel it. And I like the part of me that like did quiz bowl and debate in high school is kind of like amped up for I'm gonna get don't be mean to Preston comments on this episode, and I can feel it. Do you think? Yes, I think that's fair. And I actually have the same frustration. There were certain points, especially in my year of fellowship there, that it would be like, we would be talking about something and I'd be like, actually, where the hell did this come from? Like, actually, we're all just talking about this as if this is a thing. But like, where is any data? Like, couldn't I just say this? Like, couldn't I say this in just a different way? And that could be equally true based on the no evidence. Like instead of a teapot, there's a coffee, there's an espresso machine.
I challenge your teapot theory, and there's an espresso machine that you also never prove isn't there. Well, it's a SMEG food processor now, bitch. Like, deal with that.
So I think these are valid complaints. I think one of the things we're not going to go into a ton of detail today is like an actual review of the literature that's emerged over the last like 25 years. A lot of it led by Jonathan Shedler, who is kind of he's like this sort of beloved and also like rogue character in my reading of 2000s plus psychoanalysis, because
a maverick in pop psychoanalysis.
He is a maverick. Yeah. Well, he's not doing pop psychoanalysis. He's the one who's just like, we need to have some data, and also the data that they compare psychoanalysis against is like not fair. He brings up he has a number of books, lots of papers that he brings up extremely good examples on this. If we ever can get him on, we will have him on. But basically, that let's say that there is an emerging evidence body over the last 20 years for this type of therapy, but also in particular cases. So I'm going to tell you a couple of my conceptions, whether they're misconceptions or not. I probably won't know in my lifetime that I had, like, starting residency especially. So mine were, like, obviously penis envy. That's going to be the name of this episode. Obviously, that's like, I was like, what the hell? What the hell is this? Why
What the hell?
Why would there be penis envy and not like womb envy? Why is that? Although that is a theory that was then later hypothesized but never picked up. What the hell? Yeah. And then there are many valid critiques of like how psychodynamic and psychoanalytic thinking was part of and promulgated the belief that like different expressions of sexuality are pathological and regressive and a response. Like there's a ton of like denial of racism and other kind of oppression that the psychoanalytic world did not pick up on, especially in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, that other schools of thought moved quicker on. So I came in just kind of like angry in my psychodynamic class and was like, and what the fuck is it? We'd be reading Freud and I'd be like,
so it's like being gay is a sickness and you just don't have insight into it.
yeah. Well, it would be like there's something that developmentally paused you is like what they would have claimed,
I
basically.
see. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's many writings on this that are extremely damning and that I think the world of modern psychoanalysis is still dealing with.
I mean, it's tough when your basis of evidence is I just came up with it in my head this morning.
Okay, not too much though. Not too much on it. Not too much on it because the other thought worlds of therapy haven't dealt with this either, and neither have our medication prescribing. Like the DSM hasn't dealt with this very well either. So get out.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
Get out. Come with here.
Okay, stop the dog pile, Preston.
I'm not doing this. I feel like now psychoanalysis is like my sibling, where I'm like, I can bully it, but if you say something about it,
that's fair. That's how I feel about the U.S. when European countries make fun of us. You know, like I'll criticize our military spending, but like, okay, Italy, like you can't.
You don't get to say anything right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are some of our myths. I think before we talk about some core concepts of modern psychodynamic, psychoanalytic, also pulling apart what that means, because those are two separate things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's both go with what training do you have so far? Like, what exposure have you had to the ideas of Freud and then the evolution of psychodynamic thinking, or any supervision? Kind of, what have you had so far?
Mm-hmm. So, supervision 0. My only psychodynamic experience has been reading a couple papers about it and then listening to maybe 1 or 2 podcasts. Yeah, and talking with Margaret. That's like literally the extent of it. So I know some of like the Freudian stages of development. I've read a couple of Freud's like formulations, and that's like about it. Most of my training is in either motivational interviewing or cognitive behavioral therapy, and then like some chopped up applications of DBT. That's basically what I've been taught.
And what will your third year be like? Do you know, like in terms of therapy, didactics, supervision, like how many cases you're supposed to hold?
So we have about a total of like probably 9 or 10 cases that move around depending on like what patients stay on or not. And then I don't think we have any formal didactics on therapy during our third year. So any like education we get is kind of self-directed at that point.
And I don't think that's abnormal in psychiatry residencies at this point. I think I'm on the East Coast, which is the place that has the most of it. And then, as but did a fellowship at the Psychoanalytic Institute in Boston for a year, and then also have been connected. Like my program has done something that are like psychoanalytic dinners once a month, where like faculty at the Psychoanalytic Institute have people over to their house for dinner and discuss a case. With like residents in different programs throughout Boston. So I went to that my first couple of years. And then we have a psychodynamic case conference that starts during our second year through fourth year. That's like every Wednesday, and residents present and formulate their case. And then I have had weekly dynamic supervision for the last 3 years, I guess.
Yeah. So
and then some
your
formal
psychodynamic
teaching.
training really trumps mine. Or I guess like mine pales in comparison. So like all these criticisms I have, just for context, are based off of essentially no experience with it.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think like I chose coming to the program I went to for residency from a biologic. I mean, it was still a pretty biologic program on the scale of things, but because I was interested in therapy. My other background is, but just to give kind of insight to people, is CBT you have to do in psychiatry residency, and then I did 2 years of ACT training for OCD, or acceptance and commitment therapy. So I say that just to give our listeners a kind of where are we coming from? What have we trained in so far? And then I've been seeing patients weekly for dynamic for like 3 years now, I guess. Um, so I say that not to compare ours, but just to compare that to people who've been practicing for 30 years and have like evolved with the field. This counts as one of my caveats. This one does. Just to say, I'm still very much at the beginning of my training in psychoanalytic and psychodynamic.
And I haven't even started.
Well, and we're here, you know?
You're at the threshold.
So I wanted to start, actually getting into the meat of the topic by talking about so there's psychotherapy, right? And under psychotherapy falls all of the different types of therapy that people might refer to, practice as psychiatrists, or, people might have heard of. So DBT, ACT, CBT, behavioral therapies, expressive therapy, psychodynamic, psychoanalytic, relational, family therapy, couples therapy, all of these fall under the psychotherapy umbrella. Within psychotherapy, there's then like the psychodynamic, psychoanalytic type of therapy. In that category, there is psychodynamic psychotherapy and and then like psychoanalysis. There is some spectrum in between, some people would argue, but for our sake, I'm going to leave it here.
Yeah. And then the CBT, DBT, CPT is all over on this behavioral branch. So we're like on two different branches of a tree.
Right. Which
and
we can...
Now we're venturing over to the psychodynamic, psychoanalytic branch.
Correct. And the reason that they're so separated has a lot of what we won't go into that. But the history of that's actually really interesting because basically psychoanalytic institutes weren't in academic settings. Like they were their own standalone things. And they also only accepted MDs up until like the late 80s. Like basically you had to be an MD to be trained in psychoanalysis. And so people who were in other modes of training to provide psychotherapy, basically everyone else, because we don't even really think of MDs doing therapy anymore, were not allowed in those institutes. And their training and the evolution of, from behaviorists through kind of like Carl Rogers, then CBT, then the modern like DBT ACT and everything, is super impacted by this historical, academic, and like literally place divide. And this, I should say, was in the US. In like the UK and like the rest of Europe, there wasn't this like division, and Freud was actually against this, that like only MDs can do psychoanalysis. So I think that's fascinating because you'll see that there's like kind of evolution and ideas happening in the culture that impact both the schools in a like specific way, and how they respond to the changing culture is quite different. But to get back to this point on the branch, so if you had to guess, Preston, what would you say is the difference between psychodynamic psychotherapy and psychoanalysis?
So just going off of the words, psychodynamic to me kind of suggests that there's some like evolution in like the therapy with like the behaviors as you go. And psychoanalysis seems like you kind of look at someone and then you do all the analysis yourself, I guess. So I picture you kind of rolling together in psychodynamic, and whereas psychoanalysis, it's almost like you're peering through a one-way mirror and you make your determination on that person, but they can't look back at you. That's how I would see it.
Yeah, so that's wrong.
Ayo.
Ayo. So if we think about, some people will refer to psychodynamic psychotherapy as psychoanalytic psychotherapy, and that is different than psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is in many ways the classical model that is very determined by form, of you're going 3 to 5 times a week. There is more of an emphasis on the blankness of the clinician, so that transference and countertransference and then interpretation, what's happening in the room, can be the center of what you're doing. And there is more of the kind of classic, like you're going to be on the couch and face away, and there is going to, yes.
So I said the metaphor for a one-way mirror and you just said flat wrong, but it seems like what you're describing right now is a one-way mirror.
Well, but dynamic, so it's not the difference in the approach, it's the difference in like the frequency, and dynamic can still be the blank slate. So like
I see.
dynamic is basically like we aren't going to have as strict of rules around how often we're meeting. Like if you ask like
Gotcha.
classical analysts if they can do psychoanalysis and only see you once every 2 weeks, they'll say that's not psychoanalysis because it's not enough frequency for the relationship to form in the room where there can
It's
be
not
kind of
true psychoanalysis.
well, I mean, to be very fair to them, like there is something specific that happens that if you only see each other like once a month, or if you only see each other every other week, and even once a week, not for most patients, but for some things that you're working on with people, there's a term that analysts use that's like you get crusted over, that basically like if you're gone from someone for too long, then it's hard to contact the emotional thing that you've been repressing and having defenses against. And then you have to work all session again to get back to the point. I'm sure you've experienced this as a therapist where it's like you get to something and you feel like you get to a breakthrough in the session with someone.
And then you regress.
Yeah, and then the next session, it's like, where did it go? And maybe you get there eventually again a few weeks later. But so again, I don't practice like 4 times a week with people. I'm not saying I'm a psychoanalytic person, but I have come around to some of the form may be right in certain clinical situations, which we can talk about. So basically, dynamic and psychoanalytic could all be evolved from the line of thinking of psychoanalysis.
Like Pokemon.
Yes. Yeah. So difference there, just to summarize, more rigid for psychoanalysis. You're going 3 to 5 times a week. There are some people who will be like, maybe you don't have to, but mostly psychoanalysis is like 3 to 5 times a week. More of the like, I'm not disclosing to you. I'm pulled back. Some modern psychoanalysis, they don't think you need to do the couch, but it's this frequency and like, we're not doing other stuff with it. Like we're not also incorporating DBT skills. We're not also incorporating like,
it's distilled in its purest form.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that we're supposed to all, as psychiatrists, have dynamic patients at some point during our residency. I think that's part of the ACGME requirement still.
I mean, I don't know.
I'm sorry. I'm like slamming you after call.
Well, the thing is, like, yeah, I'm sure we have like 2 or 3 like afternoon didactic sessions where someone's come to talk to us about psychodynamic, and then we've technically had the opportunity to incorporate that into our therapy interactions. So we've thus checked the box on psychodynamic education. Yeah. But I think it's different than like coming back and purposely trying to do a psychodynamic approach with a patient with supervision every week. So before we dive into the rest of what psychoanalysis is and show more of Preston's ignorance, we're going to take a quick break.
I'm so sorry. I did not mean to.
I'm not taking any offense to this because I don't take pride in my knowledge of psychoanalysis. Like Preston's ego is not built off of the pillars of how expert he is at Chase Lounge interpretations. So
not too much.
Have at it.
Not too much on it. Hey, Preston, what does this sound remind you of?
Oh, God, it makes me think about being on call. It's the pager.
Okay, well, it's not my pager, but it is equally stressful and is the timer I use for studying.
Oh, we got a Pomodoro queen over here.
Do you know what has made studying less stressful, though?
What?
Now You Know Psych. You familiar?
Am I familiar? I use Now You Know Psych for my in-training exams. Are we talking about the same thing? That excellent resource that has thousands of questions with associated flashcards, organized content in a user-friendly way?
You use it for Prite. I'm using it for the board exams. But yes, we are talking about the same resource.
We can use it for both? Ayo.
Ready to take your exam prep to the next level? Go to nowyouknowpsych.com and enter the code BEPATIENT at checkout for 20% off. That's nowyouknowpsych.com. So I'm going to ask you a question, then I'm going to not ask you prodding questions anymore. Welcome back, listeners. If you had to define what happened, not in psychoanalysis, but let's just say psychodynamic therapy for now and talk about the theory, which, as we said, can be shared in psychodynamic and psychoanalysis, even if the form changes. What would you describe from what you know, if you had to guess? Like, how is psychodynamic therapy different than like CBT?
This is one I think I do have some insight into. So CBT is really a way to control someone's behaviors. It's in the core of the word. And the analogy I like to use with this is like a house. Your mind is your home. And CBT teaches you skills about how to fix things around your house. Like maybe the windows are broken or there's like a hole in the wall that's been affecting you. You have a maladaptive way of coping with it. And then we teach you some carpentry skills to go and fix it. But psychodynamic theory goes into the basement, I would say. There are aspects of unconscious drives or motives or concerns that control your behavior the same way conscious things do. And psychodynamic theory is a way to uncover what some of those unconscious things are, which most likely came up through your childhood, and then be curious about how those influence your behavior now. So with the house analogy, it would be, why do you have termites in your basement that's affecting these like weight-bearing beams? Like that's curious. Like, how did these get in here? Why is this part rusted? Why does this foundation look like this? And then you're like, oh, my whole house is slanted because the foundation was built weird. And like, I've learned my whole life that I have to, set cups a certain way or do all this other stuff, but I never really understood that this all because it was built on this one thing. So I see psychodynamic therapy as a lot of it is investigation of the childhood and then seeing how that has influenced certain ideas we have about ourselves that kind of guide unconscious behavior today.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great metaphor. I think
Hear that? Great metaphor. Bingo. She didn't say wrong with the heart thing. Now back to you, Margaret.
I think that's a great metaphor of kind of some of the core differences of these approaches. I also think that's, it's part of the strength and the weakness of the psychodynamic psychoanalytic approach is if someone comes to you in the emergency department or in an inpatient unit where you're going to see them for 10 days, like probably being like, there are psychoanalytic people that disagree with this, but probably for the most part, teaching them concrete coping skills and just like, what are we even talking about? Doing like psychoed might be more effective and appropriate than trying to do depth work in a 10-day stay in an inpatient unit.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask these patients, like, well, what was your childhood like? And they're like, I don't even remember it. I'm like, well, okay. Well, we've got 72 hours for you to start remembering it, and we got another 72 to analyze it. So, like,
we have
up,
3
baby.
business days, not including holidays, to solve it.
And also, you're under emergency detention and can't leave, and I'm the
also
reason
we started Therapeutic. Also, you're in withdrawal, but it's going to be awesome. So one of the texts that I'm going to refer to is there's an evidence-based psychodynamic therapy is a textbook from, I believe, post-COVID 2022. It'll be in our show notes. But the author goes through different major figures in different schools of thought within psychoanalysis and psychodynamic theory over the last 100 years. And it's like, what do they say it is? Because it's hard to actually define, like, who does this treat? Why does it work? How does it work? And when do you know you're done? So he quoted Glenn Gabbard, who people in the psychodynamic world will be familiar with Glenn Gabbard.
I have her book on my shelf.
His.
Her story. A woman. Gabbard just sounds like a woman's name.
Glenn Gabbard.
I don't know. Maybe I have inverse penis envy.
Well, have the pelvic floor therapist back on.
Pelvic floor envy.
Okay, so quoting Glenn Gabbard, defines psychodynamic psychotherapy as, quote, a therapy that involves careful attention to the therapist-patient interaction with thoughtfully timed interpretation of transference and resistance embedded in a sophisticated appreciation of the therapist's contribution to the two-person field. That's actually by Gunderson and Gabbard, Gunderson, shout out to people who are working with BPD and not DBT, but he's a big deal in the BPD world. So just to go back to that, I'm going to read that again because I actually feel like it's getting at some of the core elements we're about to talk about.
Okay.
So,
can you do it but slower?
Yes. A therapy that involves careful attention to the therapist-patient interaction or dynamic, dyad, so that relational center, with thoughtfully timed interpretation. So we're not just like looking at you and analyzing and saying, you're using this defense and this defense. Carefully timed of transference. So what the patient to oversimplify, puts onto you and into the relationship. And resistance. So what are we trying to not see? What's under the house, kind of as you're saying in your metaphor. Embedded
Why
in
is the basement door locked?
Where are the termites? Yeah. Embedded in a sophisticated appreciation of the therapist's contribution to the two-person field. So the countertransference and our own biases that we bring into the room and into the relationship, which is one of the themes of psychoanalytic thought over the last century since Freud is, he has a lot of problematic parts of him. He's a lot of problematic parts of him.
Say it.
But also we take so much for granted of how we talk about therapy now, even when we're talking about CBT, when we're talking about pop psychology, that is in the water because Freud was actually quite radical. No one thought what Freud really thought, at least at that time where he was in medicine. Certainly there are things that we've missed because we've refused to see other groups of people who have wisdom. But Freud was quite radical. And so the idea that, for example, trauma might impact people over the long term and cause differences in how they emotionally relate to things and feel and somatic symptoms show up was something we just think now, but much as everyone hates Big Daddy Freud, there is a lot of
He was the
thought.
first person to formulate that as a concept.
Yeah, and then famously gave it up because everyone was like, men would never do. I'm not kidding. Do you know this?
Really?
Yeah.
No.
He was like, all of these girls and women are traumatized because I think there's been a lot of sexual abuse that has happened to them in their families. And presented this as a paper to this fancy board basically in Europe. And a lot of his patients were these fancy people in Vienna as children or really they're related to them. And they were like, no, this can't be true. And then he was like, you're right, they're making it up. That, he worked with people with hysteric patients. So women
and was they're being traumatized by their families, and then all the oligarchs are like, these families, the aristocrats,
us
had to come from somewhere. That's impossible. Go back to the drawing board. Oh yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
It's all just made up. You guys are perfect.
Yeah.
How could I be so dumb?
If you read Freud deeply, it's interesting because his theory and what gets approved and how it changes over time versus his actual clinical approaches are not the same. He's actually a much kinder and gentler clinician than some of his theory writing makes him sound. He's yeah, theory's cool, but you kind of, you can't just use a hammer for everything.
Yeah, you have to be thoughtfully timed with the hammer.
Yes, exactly.
Gently stroke their cheek with it.
Do you know that they used to do this? That the first what they thought was working in psychoanalytic therapy with Freud was they would place their fingers on the person's forehead and be call to mind the memory. And they thought, I'm not kidding. And they eventually realized that's actually not what's making this work or happen. So
maybe they just didn't use two hands.
Yeah, they just needed to
mind the memory.
To just float. So I want to go into a little more detail around transference and interpretation. So if you had to define transference for people listening who are not sure what that is, how would you try with curiosity to define it?
Okay, it's how the patient takes ideas about relationships or people in their life and settles them onto the therapist. So transference is where you start to see the therapist similar to other people in your life. And you basically, because in theory, you don't know anything about who this therapist is. They're just kind of sitting there to reflect things onto you. So you're not creating a true formulation of what this person is, but you're projecting some of your other relationships onto them. So for example, someone may, an older woman may remind you of your mother, and then you start to talk to your therapist in a way that you would talk with your mother or something. For example, that'd be an example of transference.
Yeah, if she's a couple minutes late, it's you don't care about me and my there's something in you that you may be, not conscious of that is
yeah,
I bet this means this more than someone who didn't have that experience.
Yeah, and then you make assumptions that your therapist may think similar to that other person that you're projecting onto them.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So and there's coherence if we take a step back, as we like to do on this podcast, and we think about like the episode we did on attachment and John Bowlby's idea of like internal working models of attachment, right? There's been an integration in the last few decades of attachment, like studies and psychoanalytic thinking. But we can see that there is this similarity. So that even though all these schools are separate and like, no, we don't, we have the truth, you don't, there is still this kind of like, you can think about it as in childhood, in attachment, you would say you learn a certain way of getting safety, getting your needs met, and then you project that onto how you're going to interact in the world. And we might call that transference or call it something different in psychodynamics.
Yeah, I found like with a lot of these therapies, it feels like just using different lenses to observe the same phenomenon. You know how in physics class, when you had to calculate a ball rolling down a hill, and they're like, do it using Newtonian mechanics. And then they're like, do it again with kinetic energy. And you're like, whoa, these two different, seemingly totally different models manage to get you to predict the ball in the same place. I think that's kind of like what a lot of these different like therapy theories are. And we have a different lexicon and different names for it, but it's all the same flower petals and stems and whatever else we're observing.
Yeah. But I mean, similar to that analogy is that different lenses might give us more accurate, different lenses give us different information and different ways to hypothesize causes and treatment.
And different people interpret differently in different lenses.
I guess what I'm saying is we probably need all of them. Like we probably need the like not all of them for every patient, but like it is our own, because we're in the psychoanalytic episode, it is our own fantasy that any one system, I think at this point in the history of mental health, is going to get us to wellness for everyone. And so similar to the like physics class, like you would like to know all of the different equations and ways of making sense of this so that you can put it together and know the most possible about the ball rolling down the hill.
Yeah. So MRI, CT, EKG,
analysis,
X-ray. There's no single one that's the best.
Right. And the other thing, I think one of the other parts of transference is just to touch on a couple like common ones people might hear. So there's idealizing transference. So this can happen sometimes, and this can happen in any patient, but I think one of the ways we think about it is like when someone has borderline personality disorder and we talk about a split, idealizing would be one side of it, and then the devaluing is on the other side of it. In psychoanalysis, it doesn't have to come with devaluing. It can come as like this way of admiring someone and using that as something that's helpful so you can trust and do the process of therapy that is scary and anxiety provoking because you're uncovering stuff. But it can also be something that can be used as a sort of defensive maneuver to not actually get to know someone or not. Like if it happens in not therapy, but like in a relationship, right? You won't actually know the person if you won't ever take them off the like they're this god authority replacement mother figure. That's a common one. There's some others, but I feel like there's, there even primary care doctors. There's this. Have you read the paper, the like caring for the hateful patient?
No.
Okay, it was in like was it in JAMA? Anyway, it doesn't matter. But all of us have experienced this where we walk into a room and we feel one way. And like every time we walked into a room that day with a bunch of different sorts of people, we still felt similar. And then suddenly something feels like tilted off its axis and how this person's interacting with us. And we don't know what's going on. And it feels like we haven't even said anything yet. And already there's something being put into us or, projected into us. And then my other question for you before we play our I'm going to be your dynamic patient and then we're going to make a formulation together, which I will prompt you through, is interpretation. What would you explain if a patient said, I went home and I read a WebMD article about psychodynamic therapy and it said you're going to interpret things? What would you say that means?
I guess it means I'm going to apply inductive reasoning and form hypotheses about the relationships between past experiences you may have and current drives or for behaviors that you deal with today. So an interpretation could be like, I think that you put men on a pedestal because you put your dad on a pedestal because he was the only one around after your mother left, and that it was really traumatic for you to see your dad as a fallible person, because then it almost seems like maybe your world would have collapsed. So now you've kind of taken that idea of men and translated it onto other men. But because of that, you don't see the flaws in your partner and end up in a lot of traumatic relationships or get in too deep. So I basically, I see something from your past, I form a hypothesis about how maybe affects your present, and then I share that with you, and then we both say, do we agree or disagree with this?
Right.
That's how I'd say interpretation goes.
Yeah. I think the idea of it being a hypothesis is helpful and is the way most modern psychoanalysts and dynamic therapists would present it. I think the other thing to think about, and there are people who are quite rigid around, and maybe this makes sense for them, but like very rigid around what interpretation is, and that it's only verbal and it's only when you're really directly pushing against in a certain way. But I think a majority of modern kind of psychoanalytic thought is that interpretation can also be there are levels to what the response can be. So an interpretation could be me saying directly like what you just said, or it could be me holding inside myself, like working with this person, like what they just said about a relationship, and then noticing what's rising in me as they say it. And then in knowing them in the relationship dyad, saying what part of this is like in the neighborhood is a phrase that people will use sometimes in dynamic work. Like, what is a part that will push them a little bit to take a step and look at and question and maybe bring to consciousness something they're not aware of? But that isn't so much that it steals the revelation from them is another phrase people will use. So it could be, to one kind of side of the spectrum, could be saying explicitly like what you just said, right? But it could also be something like, instead of like, let's say like before her mom, this patient's mom left, like the way they responded to her was like to shut down their emotions and tell them they didn't want to hear about them. So maybe the interpretation would be something gentler and saying like, I wonder, we've talked about how it's hard. You've had a history of people not listening, or like this person, whatever. I can feel you wanting to move on from that topic, or like, I'm wondering if we should stay even more with this whatever, like that kind of thing.
Or maybe she says, Preston, I think you're perfect. Something I get a lot and have to deal with. And then I reply, just like how you thought your dad was perfect in your recent relationship.
So that's
interesting.
So that would be, again, on this side of interpretation that's like extremely direct and kind of concrete.
Oh, that's super direct?
Yes.
I guess, okay, shoot.
So that would be super direct. Like in that example, an interpretation could still be, I wonder, like, it could be that you show up on purpose 2 minutes late to the next appointment. It wouldn't be necessarily that, but like it could even, the middle of the spectrum might be like, I wonder why. I get the sense that it's really important to you that like you see so much good in me, but I wonder if it's hard for you to think about the things that may not be very good in me as your therapist, because that could be scary. You don't have to connect it to the dad stuff, but you in your mind can be like, the pattern I think that's repeating is this dad stuff.
Yeah. So like, I wonder why you want me to be so perfect as your therapist or something. Okay. Interesting. That's a little nudge.
So it can be anything from like very subtle to just like how you respond, like with your body language in the room, all the way to a more direct, like, I think that they're ready to hear this. Because it's kind of like when you go to a primary care doctor and they're like, you need to get out there and be running more, like that your blood pressure is high or something. How many people actually change their behavior because of that?
Yeah.
Like it kind of is like, it has to come from the inside and you have to write it.
Well, and there is a name for this too, right? It's called like therapeutic reactance or something, which is where if you bring up an idea.
Face at you.
Oh, really? I thought that was just you responding to your drink. So you can correct me on this one too.
No, I'm not going to correct you. I didn't mean to make as mean of a face as I did. I've actually not heard that term.
Oh, okay. I think it's so basically when you bring up something too strong and too stark that people are going to resist it just because of how radical the idea is, even if it is like true or accurate to them. So, like if I push too hard, people's natural response is to kind of pull away. And that's something we see a lot in I see it in consult liaison, weirdly enough, when we have these, alcohol use disorder patients who are dying of cirrhosis. And then the internal medicine team is like, what if we just convince them a little bit more how much they're going to die if they continue to drink. And you're like, you're right. Yeah, let's keep digging on that side. And then they kind of push, more into denial. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that another view of psychodynamic thinking is that what's happening is a quote, corrective emotional experience. Like that is the work of therapy. And in some ways, you could probably apply that to different modalities of therapy and maybe is related to why the Therapeutic Alliance is like the biggest predictor of success of therapy or symptom reduction. But in that, right, you could have two people come in with, on the surface, the exact same story, but one of them internalized their story as like, I'm not allowed to feel sadness. And the other one internalized it as, I'm not allowed to show anything but anger, right? And the way you respond to those people with the same story, even from the same family, would be very different. And it's not just resistance. It's also like maybe one of those people like never got to speak. So you speaking that out before them is actually worsening their feeling of disempowerment. That is like the core reason of why they're coming to therapy in the first place, rather than needing to know the exact kind, or like I think about like people who really rely on like over rationalization or intellectualizing their feelings. That would be giving an interpretation to someone like that would be the exact wrong move, because I'm actually enacting with them this avoidance of their emotions.
Yeah, that's what my therapist did to me.
What?
No, because so I love intellectualizing things and I love analysis. And I'm like making my own formulations about myself. And she's like, Preston, why don't you just feel what's in your body right now? And I'm like, no. She's like, do you feel hot? Do you feel cold? Like, what are you feeling? Let's just talk about like the somatic sensations that you experience. And so like, she would often try, like, I think she would get like frustrated with like how much I had to interpret everything and would just kind of force me to just like return to stillness.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a good move on her part. And then I try to incorporate it too, because I'm like, oh, I think I also, project my own, I guess, preferred pathways of analysis onto my patients. And I've been learning over this last year the different ways you have to show up for people. Yeah. And interestingly, so I'm one who loves to analyze and form these hypotheses. And I realize that so many people that come to therapy, especially in underserved places like San Antonio or South Texas, where they're kind of, they're therapy naive, I guess I'll say. The first like few months or sessions, it's really just being someone who can be an empathetic listener. Yeah. And people are so deprived of that in their life that the best way to show up for them is just to be like, wow, that sucks.
Yes. So
it doesn't seem psychoanalytic to just kind of be offering supportive psychotherapy intentionally, but I've observed that this is the thing that this person needs right now before they can even go into criticizing or forming analyses.
Yeah. So that brings, one other point. We're going to make a couple other points, then we're going to do our practice. I'm going to kind of blitz through these, but that brings up something, which is Glenn Gabbard's also been part of a series of the basics of therapy. That's a series of books I think a lot of residencies have that are like, each of them are this big. They have one on CBT that he didn't write, but he was like the editor for a lot of these. And they have like short-term psychodynamic therapy, long-term psychodynamic therapy are the two separate ones in it. And one of the things that's an important concept is the spectrum. It actually was originated by Laborsky in 1984 of thinking about the like different ways of approaching that is the supportive to expressive or you could say instead of expressive, like analytic kind of depth work spectrum. It's not that psychoanalysis doesn't ever do supportive or that supportive never does depth and analysis, but that when you're thinking of like a patient who you really cannot, like, let's say they're in crisis, like they're on a short-term unit, they've recently had like self-harm or a suicide attempt or something like that. This is not the time to push them into depth and be like, we have to talk about that trauma that or whatever. We have to talk about this like pattern of relating, because it is it's like doing construction on the house. It's like, okay, we're going to go in and we're going to take out that core pillar that's falling away. Things are going to be bad for, not bad, but they're going to be
we're going to be
less stable.
fumigating. So you better move out.
You better move out, right? Like we don't take away a defense without enough support and kind of strength in there to help rebuild something in some ways. So that's just to say that like they aren't opposites. They just like supportive therapy, right, lives mainly over here, and true psychoanalysis lives mainly over here. But like, let's say you're doing psychoanalysis with someone for 3 years and then like their spouse dies. Like a psychoanalyst is probably going to like lean away from as much depth work or pushing as much and go more towards supportive during the times when their patients are more in crisis. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we are going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to do a 5 to 8 minute mini session, and then we will formulate. We're going to role play.
Yeehaw. Okay. I'm going to go get my acting chops ready.
Okay. We are back for our favorite section to do, and sometimes the best section in the podcast, and maybe sometimes also the weirdest. But we are going to practice what we just learned. Preston, how are you feeling?
I'm always ready for some real life application.
Okay, are you ready for your fictional vignette?
Yeah. Let's go test this baby out on the racetrack.
Okay. So, in your psychodynamic clinic, you have your patient presents, who is going to be your psychodynamic patient for this year. You will see once weekly.
I'm at Psychodynamic Incorporated. Patient comes in. Okay.
You're a big big Freud. So she is a 34-year-old white woman, domiciled, living in a large urban area. She works as a columnist for a newspaper in the large city, and the column is her writing about
Did
her
you
love
pre-write
life.
this?
Yeah.
Wow, I nailed it.
What? No,
Sorry, keep going.
It's not exactly where.
When I was describing my classic psychodynamic patient. Yeah. Okay, keep going.
She is presenting to you for therapy after a year of an on again, off again relationship with a man that she calls Mr. Big. And you haven't watched Sex and the City? Okay. She describes a lot of anxiety about work, and then but more so about this relationship. Her psychiatric history otherwise is she's never seen a therapist. She's never seen a psychiatrist before. Her family sort of didn't believe in psychotherapy or anything like that. Her seeing shrinks, quote, from her. She describes you as a shrink as well. But she is presenting now at the recommendation from 2 of her friends to talk about the emotions she's having in this romantic relationship. And mainly she says she just wants to get rid of all the anxiety she has about said relationship. So no acute safety concerns, no kind of significant medical history concerns. She is a pack-a-day smoker, but otherwise relatively well-functioning, bright, well-dressed, very well-dressed, and presenting to seems a little bit maybe mildly anxious, also kind of makes a number of jokes and again refers to you as a shrink throughout. So I'm going to set my timer. We're going to do 5 minutes of you trying to get to know this character, and then we will do a formulation on 5 minutes for fun.
Okay. Well, is this Sarah Jessica Parker's character by chance?
Yes,
okay, I know nothing about Sex and the City. I'll just
That's
picture
good.
it. Okay.
That's good.
Okay. Well, welcome. You go and have a seat.
Do you want me to sit on this chair? Like, do I look away from you? Can I smoke in here?
I'd prefer if you didn't.
Okay.
What brings you to therapy?
Well, my friend told me I should go because of this relationship that I'm in that's not really a relationship, but is sort of a relationship. But she says I am pretty anxious all the time.
Mm. So your friend sent you.
Yeah, she said her shrink had helped her feel better and that I needed to do something because I keep talking to them about it every day over Cosmos. Oh,
Gotcha. And is that something that you want to feel better?
I mean, I would certainly like to stop talking about Big all the time.
Who's big?
Big is my not boyfriend. I mean, he is the guy I've been seeing for a year, and we see each other every week. We see each other a couple times a week, and we mainly see each other when we're out and then go home together. And sometimes we've gone on dates, but it's never really progressed more into like a full relationship. Like I've never had a key to his place. I haven't met his family hasn't met mine. He ditches my friends and I. And recently I realized he was still dating other people at the same time as dating me,
Mm.
which is shitty. But we can just have fun.
Mm-hmm. Are you having fun?
I mean, the sex is good.
So you have this sexual relationship with someone that hasn't blossomed romantically in any way.
I mean, I don't think I've ever felt for someone what I feel for him, but
Mm.
so I'm kind of stuck.
What's different about him?
There's just something intoxicating about him. Like the first time we met, even the first time we met, it was exciting. And he implied he thought I was a prostitute. And I feel like that's, I mean, damn, that's the first day. And I feel like that's still how he doesn't make me feel like a prostitute, but he's ashamed of my column I write and downplays it and doesn't bring me around any of his finance friends or any of his high New York City society people that he used to be around all the time and is still around sometimes with his ex-wife.
So the way he's denigrating to you that's the intoxicating
I mean,
part?
he's not denigrating to me.
I guess he called you a prostitute and
It
he's
was, I
ashamed
mean,
of
he
your
was joking.
column.
He was joking. I mean, I mean, come on, have a sense of humor.
You're right. I can take things quite literally. So what was your childhood like?
You know, the usual
I
mom.
don't know.
Well, I mean, I was, how many, 35, 34 now. I was raised in the 70s. Um, my dad was always at work. My mom was had a lot of, let's just say she had a lot of Valium and a lot of drinks.
Mm,
No cigarettes though, which I still wish you would. Some shrinks let their patients smoke in the office. You know that, right?
I'm aware.
So she was checked out. Never saw my dad really. Had a brother. He was kind of around. He's fine. Nothing for you to psychoanalyze me about.
So everything was normal and perfect.
Well, no, but it wasn't anything big that you're going to take and write in your notes that you're not even writing notes. Why aren't you writing notes?
Yeah. I notice you're pretty concerned about how I interpret you.
Yeah, I mean, isn't your job just judge what's wrong with me so you can fix it?
Mm, I don't think so. I think my job is just to help you feel better.
Good job.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like I was
Thank
trying
you.
to get you off center. I was playing my character, not perfectly, but
You're doing a good job. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was
Thank
like,
you.
dang, she's turned up the heat a little bit.
I know. Well, there's an episode where she sees a shrink, or she sees a psychiatrist, and that she's not having it. She's funnier than I am with that, but
Yeah.
okay. So obviously, this is a very short. That was my third caveat of the episode because there was one I didn't mention in there, but this is very short. But I think talking about some of these core things that we've mentioned for what makes psychodynamic therapy different outside the form than other types of therapy. So let's start with this kind of like in the chief complaint way. What would you say she's coming to therapy for? Like, what's your sense of her?
She's coming so she's having relationship distress and or relationship dissatisfaction, I guess. And I think a lot of that is a mismatch in desire between her and this partner.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess where I didn't go with it, like if I want to take a more behavioral lens, would be like, what makes you anxious? Like, oh, when you find out that he's seeing other people, okay, how do we bottle that anxiety, or how do we dissipate it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do we cope with it? I think ours was rather just continuing to excavate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do we untangle this knot between you and Big, and why it's so distressing to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I think you did a great job of kind of showcasing that. She's like, oh, it's just sex and we can have fun. Yet also I'm extremely distressed by it and I'm frustrated that it's not progressing. Like, that's like a huge mismatch.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried to like kind of push on that maybe too early, where I was like, doesn't seem like you're having fun
Mm-hmm.
with this person. It seems like it's driving you to see me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of more
Yeah.
this kind of almost like Socratic meandering
Right.
curiosity.
And maybe you already get a flavor in some ways. What would you say the flavor of her defenses are? So, like in those moments. So there's definitely a use of humor as like a way of pushing off. So a not an adaptive use of humor.
And then she would shift the focus to me.
Mm-hmm.
So if I would kind of ask a question about something that she had resistance towards, she would then make a comment about how I'm not letting her smoke, or how I'm not behaving in a way that she would expect, or something like that. So
kind of devaluing you.
Yeah.
What if you let yourself kind of extrapolate on this? Let's say you learn over the sessions that she's doing that to you in this first session, which is one thing, but that it continues to happen whenever you get close to something vulnerable or feeling connected, or maybe you like are on call for a few weeks in a row and can't do sessions, then she comes back and she's even more this way. Let's say you notice a pattern there. If you let yourself as the therapist feel that, how might you imagine what that is like outside the room when she's interacting with this big character, Mr. Big Character? Like, is there a way that something that happens between you may be part of what happens there that is keeping her stuck?
Like she's experiencing transference where she devalues Big. That's like a part of the banter of their relationship. So when we're getting at this part where maybe she feels devalued in the relationship, that it's a projection onto me or onto Big or something. Was that what you're getting at? I'm a little bit confused by the question.
No, that's okay. A little bit. I think one of the things I was doing that you would have noticed if I kept doing it and had multiple sessions, right, is when you get close to something that may make her be perceived as weak or emotional or dependent, she strikes out kind of masochistically towards you of you're devaluing you. It's like she's devaluing you, yes, but like that particular timing. And so she's coming in and saying, I have anxiety about this relationship. It's driving me up a wall. It's just sex. I don't know what I want. Who even knows? Whatever, right? And with you, whenever you try to get close and know her and be with her in her emotions, she strikes out. And so maybe in that relationship, there's a way in which she's contributing to this relationship being like this back and forth kind of like.
So it's not just that he won't like progress it. She's not letting herself be vulnerable.
Right. And even if that would be like, if she was vulnerable, he would end it. Either of those, like that she's not the anxiety and the kind of fear of being, let's say if we're looking at like the parents she described, being too much because no one's present, prevents her from getting closure and safety either by breaking up and pursuing other options or by actually being close enough to have like a satisfying intimacy. So that would be a way that what's happening outside, you can learn from what's happening inside the room with what's happening for the problem.
Yeah. So I'd say, okay, you can't you lash out anytime you start to get vulnerable with me in the room. So I imagine that probably happens with your other relationships.
Right. So remember that thing I said about interpretation of
Mhm.
like, where do we go, how direct and not stealing their revelations?
Mhm.
So maybe a way you would say it, like, let's say you're 10 sessions in and it keeps happening, right?
Mhm.
Maybe the way you would say it would be like, sometimes I notice as we get closer to talking about something that's hard to talk about and painful, I feel like you put distance between us by making a joke or by questioning something about me. And I'm wondering if you notice that ever. And then letting her,
Just simply bring my observation to her attention
yeah, yeah,
rather than any of the interpretation that goes with it.
right, right. And maybe she'll be like, I don't know why I do that and close you off again. But
And then I'm like, see, you just did it again.
no, you don't say
There you go again.
that. You're like, we're going to get an MRI. to show you. And then I guess one last thing that I think is so important and why supervision and having continual, like every week, psychodynamic training. What was happening in you when you were pretending to be this character psychiatrist? Like, what
Mhm.
was your countertransference?
Mm.
Because this is what Gabbard was saying, and this is the relational perspective of we create the intersubjective field is the term that is often used, or this thing between us is the therapy, but that we both actually contribute to it in different ways, but we both contribute to it versus being Freud's kind of like, I'm a scientist with a microscope on a person and analyzing them.
Yeah. I don't know what my countertransference is. I have to think more about that.
Mhm.
So I guess almost like a lot of the relationships I have with mentors or people in academia, weirdly enough, that are like critical of me and my competence
Mhm.
was kind of what's coming up. And so
Yeah,
by criticizing how capable I am, that kind of called back some of that. So I felt the need to reaffirm how capable I was as a therapist and kind of felt less able to show my own vulnerability, you know.
that's great. That is,
Oh,
yeah, that's
okay,
perfect.
cool.
That's a super, I mean, you could have said anything there, but that is like a super duper common, like, especially for us as like early trainees. I, this person is saying I'm not capable. And so the kind of feeling of like, it touches on something about me that is one, is not capable, and two, is worried about worthiness and not being capable, which are two separate things. Uh, and then all the things that we do as therapists and trainees to avoid contacting that already painful spot, especially if there's prior experience of like, this part of you is bad and needs to be othered and shamed from other experiences. So I think that's great. And that's where our, I say this jokingly, but where our evil can hurt patients is if we don't have contact and like the ability to slow down with like understanding what's happening in the room and what it draws from us that is not them, then that is how we get into enactments where we accidentally redo their trauma. Boundaries are crossed. We don't, like, the relationship blows up and we never undo what is some called in one paper the crunch, which is that the dynamic gets into the room and you guys recreate something they've had before emotionally.
Yikes.
And then it's like, oh, and that's not just what the therapist brings, it's what you both bring, but it's such a core skill in psychoanalysis and psychodynamic therapy. But I think should be a core skill, not just like, oh, reflect about medicine, but like taking a minute and being like, what did I feel before I went in the room? And then what did the patient touch on in me that maybe I don't want to see, but activated me in some way or
Mhm.
drew something different that I feel uncomfortable? And how do I actually just like allow that to be there in me as well?
Mhm. Yeah, interesting.
So we just covered all of
Yeah.
we could have 1,000 more episodes about this. But we will end here for today. Any final thoughts from you on the experience of that?
No, I enjoyed it. I think I stick to what I said earlier about the falsifiable and like scientific scrutiny, but it is, I think, a really helpful process to think through. And I think if we just kind of table the need for the scientific method for a second and realize that we're just kind of philosophers trying to analyze our own thoughts, it's a really refreshing way to measure the human experience.
Yeah. I mean, well, my counter question to you would be, are medication, like, there's sort of a fantasy of certainty of provability with the medications as well.
Yeah.
So,
And I think on top of that, we sometimes fail to acknowledge that our medications are therapeutic objects in and of themselves that exist between the doctor and the patient, and that the capsule of the medicine, in a lot of ways, represents or is a metaphor for the relationship between the doctor and the patient, outside of everything that the medicine does.
so in our show notes, we will have a couple of these texts and papers cited that I mentioned. And let us know if you want us to do more sort of psychodynamic, psychoanalytic podcast episodes. There's so much we could talk about. We'll do a neurobio episode next to balance our lenses.
And then we can psychoanalyze the neurobiology.
Yeah. I'm like, so why do you like that certainty so much?
I'm just gonna lead into true. Oh, yeah.
Didn't you ask our last episode? Didn't you ask, like, do you believe in free will?
Yeah, exactly. And then we were just like going down a whole rabbit hole on determinism. Yeah. So if you like that, let us know. I'm sure we can find other guests or people to include in our psychoanalytic role playing.
Hold on, I'm sorry. We have to do one question because I did put a poll up. We'll do one question from the audience. That is my bad. Sorry. Someone asked, is there a new perspective insight you've gained training in psychoanalytic dynamic therapy compared to prior? Yes, to obviously the entire episode we just did. I think it was new to me based on my prior conceptions and misconceptions. I think one of the biggest things I took away from the fellowship year in particular was, I don't know, the importance of having kind of mystery at the center of the work that you're doing and understanding more about like what my own feelings bring into the space of the therapy that we're doing and how that can both be used positively and can be a liability. And that it's like this constant paying attention and practicing that makes these therapeutic relationships really come alive. So that's my answer to that question. I know you haven't had as much, but
yeah, I think the little bit of engagement I had with psychodynamic therapy it's been interesting to reflect on how these paradigms or concepts apply to my own relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, like something called like object constancy, or like the ability to handle the dialectic of emotions towards a person, has been something I reflect on a lot. Like, okay, how am I labeling this person as like a single good person or a single bad person? How can I kind of see them as both? Or I find myself actually, my biggest revelation is not necessarily how do I feel about this person, but what is our dyad? And so that kind of actually helps me take a third step outside of the room and like look in on our relationship from the window, so to speak. So I would say that's probably the biggest revelation I have, is just being able to zoom out a little bit more and reflect on the dyad rather than just like, how do I feel about you? Well, how do I feel about you? Like that's the real question.
Where's my tweed jacket when I need it?
Exactly.
Where's your fedora hasn't come out? Okay. Thank you guys for asking us questions. Also on there were others we will get to at another time. Okay, Preston, now you can do the outro.
You want me to roll it?
Roll it,
okay,
brother.
So if you want to come chat with us in the Human Content Podcast family, we're going to be on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. We also are available for questioning at Bad Art Every Day and at It's Presro.
For questioning.
Yes, any of your inquiries will be fielded promptly within 2 business days or 2 weeks. Who knows? Depends on how much energy I have after the call. If you want to see the full videos, they're going to be on my YouTube at It's Presro. And you can also see the video version on Spotify, which I watch sometimes. Shout out to all of our listeners who leave the kind feedback and awesome reviews. Someone posted on their story last week that we were part of their morning commute. And I forgot your name, but thank you so much. If we're on your morning commute today, I'm going to remember your name for next time. And we'll shout you out.
Stay tuned.
We're your hosts, Preston Roche and Margaret Duncan. Our executive producers are me, Preston Roche, Margaret Duncan, Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Jason Portizo. Our music is by Omer Benzvi. To learn more about our program disclaimer and ethics policy, submission verification and licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to our website, howtobepatientpod.com, or reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. How to Be Patient is a human content production.
How to be patient.
Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.